When it comes to composting on a home scale, should you make a big compost pile and apply that compost to your beds, or skip that step and simply apply the material to your beds and compost directly on your beds, saving a step altogether? That's what we're taking on in this one. Let's get into it. Over the past few months, I've been doing a lot of experimenting with a lot of different composting methods for manure, and it's really got me thinking. What's the most effective way to compost manure on a home scale? And I think a lot of you are going to start focusing on, well, should I make a pile? Should I aerate the pile? Should I turn the pile? Should I do something to the pile? And I don't know that that's the question we should be asking, because at the end of the day, that manure is going to break down no matter what you do with it. Maybe at various different rates and with various different results, but it will break down. It's just going to want to do that. Instead of asking how we should break it down, we should be asking what's the most effective use of our space to break that down. Let me explain what I'm talking about. This is a passively aerated compost pile. It takes up about 20 feet of bed space. That's a lot of bed space. And I bet if I took all this material and stacked it vertically into just 2 Johnson Sioux bioreactors, I could go from 20 feet of space down to about 8 feet of space. Same volume of material, same or better results in less space. Here's the Johnson Sioux bioreactors. The great thing about them is they go vertical versus horizontal. In that long windrow pile that was passively aerated, we spread everything out along the bed, taking up a lot of bed space. Here we can go vertical, minimizing our footprint on the bed. Something you need to think about if you have limited space on a home scale trying to compost. If you're composting something like manure that's going to break down easily, you have to ask, should you even build a compost pile in the first place? In this bed, I just layered the manure on the bed. I let it sit for a little while, and then I planted a cover crop directly into it. And that cover crop, as you can see, has done very well. I build up the soil in the bed. No compost pile required. The advantage of that is I'm never moving anything. I'm not building a pile here, taking the contents of that pile and then moving them here. Everything is breaking down right in place. All the biology, all the worms, everything is populating and being stimulated right here where I ultimately want to grow my crops at the end of the day. Layering isn't the slam dunk answer. It's not the default in all situations. Where isn't layering a fit? Well, if you have a limited number of beds, you have to ask yourself, do you want to take a few beds out of production to compost on them? Because you're not always going to be able to plant directly into that organic matter while it's composting in place. So if you have a finite number of beds, you got to decide, how many of these can I afford to take out of production to compost in place? The other thing you need to think about is, where do you want this compost to be used? If you want the compost to be used directly in the bed, then why not compost directly on the bed, assuming you have space? If you want the compost to be used somewhere else, in a seed starting mix, in a potting mix, elsewhere on the property, then it makes sense to build a separate pile. By composting in a separate pile, you finish off that compost elsewhere and then move it to your potting area, to your nursery, or wherever you ultimately need that compost. You don't want to be finishing compost in a bed and then digging that soil out of the bed to use in the nursery. Overall, plastic and organic matter create a great worm habitat. I layered down manure on this bed a few months ago, watered it in, covered with plastic, and got some amazing results underneath. An amazing broken down texture, and a perfect soil to plant directly into. Given how nice that organic matter is broken down directly on the bed, why not do that more often if you have the chance? I know Compost Guy is going to say something like, the composting process creates all sort of exudates that young plants aren't going to like, so that's why you can't compost directly on your beds. And if you're Compost Guy and you think that, well, fine. Don't compost on your beds. But in my experience, growing cover crops, growing a lot of other crops directly into this already composted material on the beds, I haven't seen those same results. Maybe I am giving up a little bit of plant growth in the near term, but overall the ease, the convenience of it, the effectiveness of it, I'm going to stick with the method of composting directly on the beds. Next time you have some organic matter to break down, think about how you're going to compost it and why you're going to compost it that way. If you have two methods that are going to produce mostly equal results, think about them in terms of space utilization during the composting process, ease of composting, and ease of use of that compost after the composting process is finished. If you have enough space and you want to use that compost in somewhere that isn't just your beds, then make a pile and compost that way. Remember, regardless of what composting guy says, there isn't a one-fits-all solution. Think about your situation, what you're trying to do, and cater results to that. And then do a bunch of experiments along the way to see what you like, what you don't like, what works, and what doesn't work. Thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.